Welcome to Inside the Mavs. Glad to have you on the program today. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Kevin Gray, Mavs Insider for 105 through the Fan, always joined by my partner, Grant Abseth of Mavs Basketball for SI, joining me here. Grant, what's going on?
Not much. Just looking forward to talking about some draft prospects for sure.
Yeah, I got a great show today as the Mavericks are getting closer to the NBA draft. Remember, you can find Inside the Mavs on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Abseth. Today, we are joined by a special guest. It is NBA draft time, so we couldn't think of anybody better to bring in to talk some NBA draft prospects specifically for your Dallas Mavericks. He is the director of scouting for NBA Big Board. You can find him on Twitter at Barlowe500. Rafael Barlowe joining us here on Inside the Mavs. Rafael, how you doing, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this episode.
I appreciate you taking the time as we get toward the NBA draft. I'll start with this because when we look at the draft itself, what's kind of the number one thing as you start diving into prospects and diving into the draft itself that you want to start to be able to decipher in terms of information, whether it be for the number one pick, which we know is going to be Victor this time around, but at the same time, what are some of the things that you start to look for when you start looking at these prospects?
Well, I start as early as August. So right after the 2022 draft, I start preparing for this draft. And so that's why I'm able to not need any notes. I mean, I've spent so much time watching them. And right now, for me, it is probably like my third round of watching videos. So I watched them in high school, or I watched their film from last year. Then I watched them during the season. And then on this last round of videos, I just focus on like what they can do. I think it's really easy to spend too much time focusing on areas that they need to improve on. So right now, I'm just going back and watching guys' strengths and like, okay, this is what he can do, or this is best case scenario, what he'll be able to bring to the table to help a team.
And when you look at this draft class, obviously we know Victor Wembanyama is the guy that's going to be going number one overall to San Antonio, but kind of just run down who are your top five in terms of your big board and who are the best five players that you're looking at going into this draft.
Yeah, I would say mine is pretty much with the consensus and no particular order. Victor Wembanyama, number one. I mean, depending on the day, it could be Scoot Henderson, number two today, and Brandon Miller, number three tomorrow. Flip-flop. Amin Thompson. And then after that, I would go with probably his brother, Asur Thompson, and then Cam Whitmore. So those are my top five.
And for you going forward here, we look at the Mavs at number 10. Give me a name or two as you have been kind of going through this draft that if the Mavericks do keep this pick, that you would be looking at to see what the Mavericks could do at that 10 spot there.
Well, if I'm Nico Harrison at number 10, I'm going with Derek Lively. I know it's against the grain a little bit. I know that you look at the numbers and you say, well, this guy averaged 3 points per game. Why is someone that averaged 3 points per game a top 10 pick? But I would go with Lively because he provides what the Mavs need, some athleticism in the front court. He was a great shot blocker at Duke this year. He was the number one player in his class. And for whatever reasons, offensively, he didn't stand out. There were times where he'd set a screen and not roll. But I think for a big man that's going to be like a vertical lob threat rim runner, college basketball is not the best place to showcase your skills there. And I think with a guy like with Luka and the spacing, I think he has the gravity to be able to suck defenses in with his hard rolls and his ability to stretch the floor vertically, which I think will help out the Mavs shooters, but more importantly on the defensive end, where he is like I said, a really good rim protector.
As far as the pick and roll kind of ability that Derek Lively has, have you seen him much in the like short roll situations? Because I know Luka, no matter who his pick and roll partner is, teams are going to throw those doubles at him, and he's going to probably give it up to the short roller as opposed to like kind of blazing past you, turning the corner for sure.
Yeah, I think he's a very, very underrated passer. And he had more assists than turnovers, which is rare. There are some point guards in this class. Of course, they have a higher usage, But there are some guards in this class that had a negative assist to turnover ratio. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it was either 12 or 14 more assists than turnovers. So I think he can make some good reads and passes in the short roll. And he had a pro day today where he shot the cover off the ball. And I didn't see it like the actual footage, but I read that he made 14 threes in a row, which I'm not surprised because when I was in Chicago last week at the Combine, I was working and, uploading my podcast, and the arena had really good Wi-Fi. So I'm in there like really, really late. And every day last week at about 11 o'clock, the group from Clutch would come in and they would just work out. They weren't doing like pro days. No, there was not any scouts in there. Only people that were in the gym were the guys from Clutch and the security and the people that were cleaning up the arena. So I had a chance to just kind of peek over, and I saw that he could really shoot the ball. Now, he showed flashes of his shooting in his last year and in the grassroots circuit and in high school. But at Duke, I think he took like 13 threes, maybe made like 2 out of 13. But the touch is there, and I think best case scenario, he could end up being like a floor spacer.
Now, it's interesting that you bring Lively up because some of the names that we've seen kind of mocked to the Dallas Mavericks, if they're able to keep the 10 pick, a name like Taylor Hendricks out of Central Florida, Grady Dick out of Kansas. Are those realistic names, and what kind of profile do they fit for the Mavericks if we're looking at both of those type of players? We'll start with Hendricks first.
Yeah, Hendricks is a guy that really kind of came out of nowhere. Wasn't a top, 20 recruit, wasn't highly touted as this one and done, can't miss prospect. And I want to say that I saw it early, and it was totally by accident. A friend of mine plays for Florida State. Central Florida played Florida State in like the first or second game of the year. And I saw the flashes, and I kind of wrote in my notes, like, okay, this is somebody to look out for. And then I had a very well-respected talent evaluator call me and was like, have you seen Taylor Hendricks from Central Florida? I'm like, I really just saw him play last night. He was like, I think this guy is going to be a first rounder. So I ended up watching him play live when Central Florida came to Fort Worth and they played in the AAC tournament. And what he does provide is floor spacing. I think he shot 39% from three, and he's a good defender. He protects the rim. So he is someone that I think could provide value for Dallas also. Not as big as Lively, but, for like a stretch four that can rebound and block shots, I think he's someone that Dallas should definitely consider.
And what about Grady Dick from Kansas?
I mean, he has a defined role as a shooter, has the positional size, can knock down open shots, shot 40% from three. I think there are some concerns on the defensive end, but he is, what teams are really coveting, especially if you already have like your star in place. He's the guy that can be the complementary floor spacer that can kind of make life easy for Luka. So I don't know if I would take him at number 9, but I would understand why Dallas would have some interest.
You know how Taylor Hendricks' stock has, definitely been one of the fastest rising, prospects. Do you see him being a player that will be available when the Mavericks, potentially select at 10th overall, or do you see him as being someone who's probably going to be out of their range, most likely?
That's a good question. I think that he was probably the biggest winner out of the draft, the lottery results. I feel like Scoot Henderson was like the biggest loser in a sense because Charlotte and Portland are picking 2 and 3, and they both have primary ball handlers. And I thought for Taylor Hendricks, he's in a situation where Orlando needs shooting. And even though they have, depth at his position, but they need shooting, and he could be someone that can go as high as 6, especially when they have 6 and 11. Indiana needs help at the forward spot, so he could end up playing there. Maybe they would go with Jarris Walker. And so I feel like he's either going to fall to Dallas at 10, or Orlando or Indiana is going to take him at 6 and 7. Because I don't think it really makes a lot of sense for Washington, especially if they're going to bring back Kuzma and Porzingis. And then with Utah, I mean, they may do it just because they have multiple picks, but Markkanen, who I imagine is going to be there for a while. So I think if he gets past Orlando at 6, then I think he can fall to Dallas.
Are there any other prospects, in addition to Hendricks, that you think the Mavericks should be kind of monitoring as potential fallers that they should be, kind of ecstatic about if they were available at that 10th spot?
Yeah, Jarris Walker would be pretty interesting, and he's someone that, and I've heard all season long from scouts, is that you don't really get a chance to see what he can do unless you went to a Houston practice, because he went to like a veteran team in Houston, didn't have the same freedom as some of the other guys that were highly touted in his class. And he really accepted a role as like a defender, connective tissue. But I think he's a really good passer, and he showed little flashes of that. But if you look at his high school tape, you see like the point forward skills. And I just want to give a quick story. So a couple of years ago, I was in Miami, and I was at a gym, and Bam Adebayo was there, and I was just asking him questions. And I said, "Can you tell me why like Zach Collins went ahead of you, and why did these guys go ahead of you?" And because he was training for, I guess, the Olympics. So I'm like, I think he was like the 10th or 11th pick or something like that, and he's going to represent Team USA. And he said, well, if you want to really be good at scouting, you always have to look at a guy's high school tape. The high school tape will show you what they can do, while the college tape will show you how they fit into a system. Because he was like, the college coach is trying to really win, not necessarily make sure the guy looks the best as far as getting to the NBA. And he said that he felt like NBA teams didn't pay attention to his high school tape, because if they did, they could see that he could handle the ball, he could pass, and he was more than, just kind of like your rebounder and finisher. And Jarris Walker is like the first name that comes to mind when I talk about a guy that his high school tape was totally different than his tape in college. And if he puts it all together, then maybe he can be like a Bam Adebayo, like a secondary playmaker guy that you can give the ball to at the elbows, that he can find cutters. And I went to a lot of Mavs games this year, and we all know that when the Mavs trapped Luka and they gave the ball to Dwight Powell in the middle of the floor, he wasn't aggressive. He didn't look to make plays for others. And I think Walker is a guy that if you trap Luka and you give him the ball in the middle of the floor, he can have like that Draymond Green type role when teams used to trap Steph, when he would find the vertical lob thread when he was playing the 4, or he can make that quick touch pass to the corner. And so I said all that to say this: I think Walker would be a good fit in Dallas because he brings defense, rebounding, toughness, and he is a connective tissue as a passer.
Give me a sleeper or two that could be there at 10. Let's say the Mavericks do decide to keep the pick, that you would be in favor of the Mavericks taking if they were able to fall there at number 10.
Maybe Cam Whitmore. I can't see him falling to number 10, but he's 6'7", 225. I think he will be able to play the 3 and the 4 spot in the NBA, and he's young. He's only 18 years old. I think he's like the second youngest player in his class, and he has some upside as a shot creator. A lot of people are concerned about his lack of assist numbers, but if you play for the Mavs, you play with Luka, they don't need you to get a lot of assists.
They don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, just run the floor, knock down open shots, and be a finisher. If he falls to number 10, I think Dallas would be ecstatic, but I just can't see a situation where he falls.
It's interesting because they love Villanova guys. We know Jalen Brunson, of course, who was taken out of Villanova playing under J. Wright as a 2-time national champion. I personally am a Villanova guy. I love Villanova guys. I'm not going to lie to you. Josh Green, I know he's developed and started to do his thing a little bit. I was personally a Sadiq Bey fan at the time when they had a chance to take him. They passed on him, including, Desmond Bane, Tyrese Maxey, among others. But it seems like Villanova guys come in ready to play. Does he kind of fit that profile of another Villanova guy that's ready to come in and play right away? Or is there still a little bit of time for Whitmore to develop his game a little bit more?
Well, even though he went to Villanova, his situation is unique because he didn't play under Jay Wright.
Yeah.
And then he was a one and done. Villanova doesn't normally recruit one and done. So he's like their first one and done since Tim Thomas. And that was 25 years ago. So again, he went to Villanova, but he's not your typical. I mean, he does have the toughness. Villanova guys are tough and they have like a certain grit to them. But he's not the guy that they were able to develop over 2 and 3 years, and he didn't win a lot of games like those other guys did. They all won championships. So, yes and no.
Go ahead, Grant.
In terms of Cam Whitmore or I guess my question would be, some of those players may not be available at 10. But would you see any player that might be worth, trading up for a couple of spots? Because I know a lot of people like to talk about, trading back, but just out of curiosity, I know it'd be challenging for the Mavs with them being restricted with their picks and valuable trade assets. But would there be anyone considering those circumstances that would be worth that type of a move up?
Wembanyama. And I mean, Brandon Miller would be great. I mean, Scoot, I don't know how realistic it is, but if they felt like, all right, we can duplicate Luka and Brunson. I mean, obviously that duo got to the conference finals, and so if they feel like Scoot and Luka can play, I don't know what they give up. I think the Mavs are in a weird situation. Even though they are in the lottery, they are trying to win now. And so I feel like the Thompson twins would be more so of a long-term play than someone that could come in right away and help. I mean, they can probably help defensively with their athleticism. But again, we're talking about two guys that are making a huge jump from overtime elite. So learning the concepts and just the big step in competition, I think is going to be a big learning curve. So I don't know. I mean, Anthony Black, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. I think he's a good defender and he has the size, but he struggles shooting. So I don't know, like moving up. I think maybe if they really like Walker or Hendricks, but they may be able to get one of those guys staying at number 10.
As we look
what
at
about
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What about a potential trade back? Is there anybody that you think could be available, maybe towards like the middle of those teens picks? Because I know, I just saw some speculation. It's not like reporting, but like, the Atlanta Hawks at I believe pick 15. Like if a team like that was interested in moving up to 10, is there any prospects that you think would be, wise for the Mavericks to target?
Honestly, if they feel like Lively is going to be available at 15, if they like 100% sure, and if they can make that trade and get an asset and still get the guy they want, that makes sense. Other than that, I mean, there's some wings. Jordan Hawkins, who's a good shooter, probably the best movement shooter in the draft. Bryce Sensabaugh, maybe Jet Howard. I don't know, maybe Ryan Rupert, who's actually been training here in Dallas. He's a French player, actually has the same agent as Wembanyama, and he played in New Zealand last year. He is a really good defender, like 6'6" with like a 7'2" wingspan. I don't know how ready he'd be to contribute on the offensive end, but Dallas does need like a wing defender. But to me, Lively is just the guy that I would go for, unless one of the guards, whether it's Nick Smith or Keontae George, one of those really highly touted freshmen falls and they like them and they want to pair them with Luka. Honestly, it's weird. I think Dallas would be in a better situation if the draft was after free agency and they knew like the whole Kyrie situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're in a weird predicament in a sense because they don't know if they're all in on win now, or do they have to decide, okay, like let's kind of lower the expectations and just kind of start building towards the future. So hopefully they have a commitment. They know either way what Kyrie's going to do before the draft. That would help them out a lot.
Can you kind of speak to a little bit more of that? Because you're right, they're being in a weird spot with, yes, an asset with a number 10 overall pick, but they've got a superstar that they're trying to appease and continue to win now. How do you think they go about trying to thread that needle, given the needs that they have to address, but still trying to at least figure out a way to build this team back up roster-wise to ensure that they're remaining competitive in the type of way that they believe they can with Luka Doncic?
Well, this is why it's really weird to me. I mean, how old is Luka? Is he 23?
2024. Yeah.
24. So it's weird. Like, what other team has a 24-year-old and they're in like this win now? Like, people are talking like Luka is 31, 32. He's been with the team for 10 years. It's almost like the stuff that you were hearing about Dirk in 2010. But Luka's 24. I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was in the same class, right? But you don't hear anything about, oh, there's pressure for him to win now. And he's won. I mean, he hasn't won it. Well, did they win a playoff series his rookie year when Chris Paul was on the team? Well, they haven't won the playoff series with him as the leader. And Luka has been to the conference finals. They were in the same draft class. They're both all NBA. One, it seems like people are trying to put this pressure on he must win now, while the other one, people are just like, oh man, the future is so bright. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have any intel whether Luke is unhappy or not, but I've been telling people all season, Jokic has had the same coach since 2015. And he dealt with injuries, but the media wasn't speculating he wants out or trying to force them to try to win right away. So with all that being said, I don't know if the Mavericks really have to like make these crazy veteran moves to try to win now. I mean, they got Luka under contract, and I don't know if he's the type to force his way out. I mean, you never know, but I do think that, I mean, obviously they should try to win now, but also I wouldn't sacrifice my future. And you don't want to be like Cleveland was with LeBron. You keep taking these veteran guys with bad contracts, and now you just can't get younger. So they're in a weird situation.
It just feels like, based on the way that this has gone so far, the timeline has been sped up so much because he's gotten so good so quickly. Yep. It feels like the Mavericks have just not been able to catch up timeline-wise to what they have in their superstar, that they feel kind of trapped in the situation of trying to thread a needle, of trying to win now. But also, it feels like Rafael, I'm thinking my radio partner, that they need to find a way to get younger, but also at the same time, find win now pieces. Is the best route, Rafael, trying to find a way to keep the 10th overall pick and use it? Or do they need to go ahead and try to find a veteran piece with that number 10 pick, and hopefully that brings in a win now piece?
I mean, I'll definitely kick the tires and see what I can get at number 10, but I try to, build through the draft. I mean, that's something that Mavs fans have been complaining about for years. And I think, having Dirk for so many years, it covered up mistakes that they made in the draft. But I also feel like Dallas has, I mean, of course, it's like a previous front office, but I feel like Dallas has done a good job as far as like finding something out of nothing, from Dorian Finney-Smith to Brunson. And even with like Josh Green, I think people will never forgive them for the guys that they passed up. But Josh is projecting to be a good NBA player. Yeah. People just weren't patient. Like right away, they wanted him to. I mean, I guess, it always hurts when Tyrese Maxey and Desmond Bane are doing what they were doing. But to answer your question, I would, again, kick the tires and see what I can get. Toronto has these wings that they seem to be holding on to. And eventually you figure they're going to have to let one of them go, whether it's OG or Pascal. I don't know if 10 is enough because they can probably convince Portland to do something at 3. But I will build through the draft.
As far as, like potential, like, I guess you could say second round prospects. I know the Mavericks don't have a second round pick, but they did trade back into the draft last year, to get the 37th pick to get Jaden Hardy. Is there anyone that you see as worth maybe trading into that second round if you're Dallas?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few guys that I think could help. I think the second round is going to be really interesting this year because on one hand, teams have multiple two-ways. So there's like 3 two-ways this year. But on the other hand, with NIL, for some guys, it's like, why would I take a two-way when I can stay in school and I can make more money at school, especially if you're at a Power 5. So I think the deadline is the 31st for guys to decide whether they're going to stay or leave. I think that's going to be really interesting because just from what I'm hearing, there are some guys that have maybe even $1 million NIL offers just to stay in school.
Wow.
Some of these Power 5 schools have this big collective of donors that are just chipping in money. Like I heard one school has like a $6 million collective that they can spread out to their basketball players.
Jeez.
So, if you're on the fence, you may decide to stay in school. And then I think maybe this year, like after pick 40, I think teams may be offering two-way contracts anyway. To answer your question, Trace Jackson Davis is a guy that I would like to see the Mavs get if they end up like maybe selecting a wing. And Jackson Davis is someone that has been very productive on the college level this year. He averaged 21 points, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks, 4 assists. I mean, the numbers, there's probably not a more productive player outside of Wembanyama in this draft. The problem is he's a little older by, NBA draft standards. To win is 23 old, but he's 23 and he doesn't space the floor. So that's like the big knock on him is that he doesn't space the floor. I think he's a good athlete. I think he could be like a younger version of Dwight Powell. And Dwight,
don't say that too loud now. No, I'm just
well, Mavericks fans, but if you think about it, Powell has been a top 7 rotation player at least the last 10 years, at least 9 years. And if you can get that type of production out of a second round pick, that is an absolute win. And so Trace Jackson Davis would be like the first name that comes to mind. As far as like there's plenty of wings that I think could be available. Like obviously they're probably going to look towards shooting. Let's see. Julian Strawther from Gonzaga could be available. He's a pretty good shooter. The good thing is like the Mavs have their guy. Right now you just got to find the complementary pieces that surround them. And I think you can find some shooters in that range.
As we get ready to close today, I wanted to ask you this because there's obviously a lot of talk about this year's NBA draft. What could be there? Victor Wembanyama, the headliner for this year's class. I want to ask you about Bronny James because we know that he's going to USC and his dad has got a lot of things going on right now in Tinseltown with the Lakers. But what are your thoughts on Bronny as a prospect and how he projects to the next level? And if you think based on what you have seen him play and all the things that have gone around him, do you believe he can be a capable NBA player at the next level?
That's a tough spot. I always try to say if his name wasn't Bronny James, would I be talking about him on a podcast 12 months before the draft? And the answer is probably not. I do think he is, he has some skill. I saw like top 10. I will say the 2024 draft class is considered to be really weak. I think he's projecting in the right way, but I have a hard time seeing him as like a top 10, which ESPN has put him as a top 10 pick. But he could prove me wrong. There were a guy like Taylor Hendricks, for example. He wasn't a top 50 recruit. Now he's going to be a top 10 pick. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Bronny. But I do think that the bloodlines and the pedigree is going to play a role. I think that for teams, you're looking for somebody that is mature and that is going to be able to handle the fame and all that comes with being an NBA player at 18 or 19 years old. He's already been able to do that. So I think he's going to be a lot more mature than the rest of his peers just because he's been famous for a long time. He's been in the limelight. And he's had access to everything. So I don't think anything is really going to catch him by surprise in the NBA. And I think that he is naturally like a unselfish guy, kind of like a connective tissue. The comparison that I think for him is, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's a bad thing. But if he's DeAnthony Melton, I think that's not bad. Now, I don't know if you would take DeAnthony Melton in
top 10.
But I see him as like that guard that likes to defend, that can play one for you sometimes. He can play two. He can play off of, a star. and he'll just be a guy that just kind of contributes to winning basketball. So that's my comparison for now. But it could definitely change.
Yeah, Bronny has got a chance to prove some people wrong. He's going to be going and playing his college ball at USC. He'll get to stay in Southern California and keep all the limelight that he wants to until he decides whether or not he's going to be going to the next level. Rafael, tell the folks where they can find you, the work that you're doing these days, and what they can look forward to as we get ready for the 2023 NBA draft.
I wanted to add, if Bronny is the 10th pick next year, and based off of the NIL projections, he's going to take a pay cut in salary.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you can find me at NBA Big Board. It's a newsletter, NBABigBoard.com. And it's, my own opinions on draft prospects mixed in with a little bit of intel that I'm hearing from agents and players and people in the NBA circles. And then I have a podcast that's 5 days a week. It's on the Locked On Network, and it is Locked On NBA Big Board. So that comes out 5 days a week. So, at least 8 times in a week, you're going to get some type of draft content from me. So I'm easy to find.
They would call you a basketball junkie because you're doing a lot of work and you do a lot of terrific work, and your story is incredible. And we appreciate you taking the time with us here on Inside the Mavs. So I know it's a busy time for you, and appreciate you carving out some time with us here on the podcast today.
Anytime. Looking forward to it. If you need me to come on after the draft or right before the draft, let me know. We can make it happen.
For sure. This has been Inside the Mavs here. Again, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Download, subscribe to the podcast, give the podcast a 5-star rating, write a review while you're there. Let us know how we're doing. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. He's got a lot of great content up right now for SI, covering the Mavericks, all this stuff with Kyrie, jumping on IG Live, talking about everything, and also everything else going on with these Dallas Mavericks. Grant's got you covered over there with Mavs SI. We'll be back next week. Continue to get you caught up on what's going on inside the Mavs. Again, download the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. For Rafael Barlowe, Kevin Gray, Grant Afseth, this has been Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you later.